Hi, my name is Kristina Lawson. I'm the director and founder of Universal Healing Sanctuary based out of Atlanta, Georgia. We are an umbrella ministry of Fifth Element Free Church, and we focus on healing, fun community events, and teaching. With my co-director, Shane Goss, she, I think, did the last sermon here on Fifth Element Free Church YouTube channel if you want to check her out. And I just want to say thank you for coming and checking out my video. This is probably going to be a little long. I signed up for this sermon just like a week ago, so I had kind of not a lot of time to do research and put this all together for you guys, but it was kind of a passion project for me. I'm really excited to share this information. It's a second video in a little series that I'm doing about like biblical misunderstandings, mistranslations. I had a really cool journey coming from normal, like fundamental Christianity into now what I call, I guess, just metaphysical Christianity. And I got there because God started speaking to me and started showing me new things to look at. And so my goal here with this series is to just help Christians or anyone really who is searching and looking for further information, but they might still be stuck in the fear. I know when I was starting this journey, I had a lot of fear around even questioning things because I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to go to hell? You know, all the things that run through your head when you're in, I don't want to be mean, but religious programming. So let's get started. Before we get into what this video is about, all the practices and other things we'll go into. But before we get into that, I just want to run through my personal journey real quick because I feel like it ties in to show you how I went from fundamentalist Christianity to what I do now. And yeah, let's get started. So, my journey. So, I started my spiritual journey as a child in the Methodist, Pentecostal, and Baptist churches. So, I've seen very different ways of believing and worshiping just in one religion. God began speaking to me in worship services, and I would often cry during the music, and the Spirit took me over strongly. I specifically remember people looking at me with this weird expression as I raised my hands and cried as a child. In middle school, I started getting messages from God in my head, what the Bible calls that still small voice, that I now use in my quote-unquote psychic readings, which is simply just hearing from God. There was one day I was sitting in my room reading when I heard the message to go out and play with my dog in the backyard. I normally never did this, and I always just took him out front for walks around the neighborhood or to play with him out there. So when I went outside into the backyard, I found my mom laying in the grass. She had broken her leg and had been screaming for help for 10 minutes, and nobody had heard her. So I think that's why God told me to go, because no one else was going out to help her. And so I was the first one to find her, and I called 911. When I was in my 20s, I fell away from practicing my Christian faith. In 2014, when I was about, I believe I was like 24, 25, I was attacked by this demon reptilian creature in my dreams and through a neighbor. It's a little hard to explain in such a short summary right now, but I'll just say that the fear was unimaginable. I've never had anything that scary in my life up to that point. These attacks went on for a while. There was much, much more to what happened, but to stop the terrifying attacks, I finally called out to Jesus and commanded the entity to go away, and it actually did. It stopped immediately. And this is when my heart came on fire to read the Bible all the way through, which surprisingly I had learned that most Christians haven't read the Bible all the way through. I read it in about 3 months. Some things didn't quite sit right in my heart about what was written, And I felt really, really guilty and fearful about that. But then I received this message from God to keep studying further into, what wasn't on the surface level. So I moved on to studying the Bible in Greek and in Hebrew, which were the original languages that it was written in. I did that for a lot of years. I saw the original meetings and I understood where it had been mistranslated into the Latin and then into the English. And it's in this English and a lot of these mistranslations that we're getting doctrines that are being taught in the modern church. And so from this, I saw a new way to know the scriptures and to know God. Then after this, I began comparative religious studies and found many, many similarities to other religions with ancient Christianity. And my eyes opened even further. My world expanded, and so did my beliefs and practices. And with the practices I'll talk about today, no, I didn't invite demons in. I didn't get possessed. My life didn't crumble. My life actually became so much more holy. I was blessed with more abundance and an ability to help others. I gained a stronger personal connection to God as well. And I didn't write this down, but I had a lot of personal healing as well. I think it was just like, I don't know, seven years ago, I was so incredibly shy. It was hard for me to even talk to people. And now I am a leader of a church ministry. So that's what God can do. God is amazing. God can heal. I also found others like me who heard the same calling and found the same information that I had just by listening to what God told me to do. My ability to hear from God and the angels expanded further to the point that I could now give other people messages as well and have helped them to know which directions to take for their highest good and for their path towards God. If that doesn't sound like good fruits of the Spirit, like the Bible talks about, then I don't know what is. So, in conclusion, this video sermon is for all the people like me who are or were like regular normal Christians and felt the calling to study more, but may have a fear about delving too deep into so-called quote-unquote evil things as defined by the church. So, let's get started. This video is called Divination, Astrology, Meditation, Crystals, and Reiki. Yes, in the Bible. We're going to go over scripture showing that all of these things are there and God approves. So we'll start out with good and evil. In Isaiah 45:7, it says, I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Yeah, the Creator creates all things and has given us a dualistic experience to see all sides of this creation and asks that we choose to follow light for our highest good. But there is learning and growth through darkness and chaos as well. This is the refining spoken of in the scriptures. In Romans 8, it says, God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. God does not guarantee a trouble-free life and highlights that both good and evil will happen to us. This verse calls us, though, to reorient ourselves and change our perspective regarding our circumstances. As in all things in the dualistic creation, which God is the creator of it all, there is good and evil. And you got to think, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? He created that. So when God told the Israelites not to do certain practices in the Old Testament, I'm going to show you that you'll actually see that Jesus, the disciples, priests, and kings did the exact same things that God said to not do. Or, well, at least it seems so. So then what does this mean? How can we rectify this? In context, God was telling us to not do the dark side of these things to keep us safe and on a holy path. Existence is a pendulum. Good and evil exists within everything. So, for example, sex without love is harmful, but sex with love is beautiful. Or eating a gluttonous amount of food is deadly, but eating a normal amount keeps us alive, etc. You can take anything in this world, and it can be holy or unholy. You can corrupt a good thing, so you just got to keep that in mind. And so with the subject of this video, or the subjects of this video, such as divination, crystals, Reiki, and so on, that have been demonized for centuries by the church, I will prove they can also be holy with scripture and were even practiced by holy people. So we're going to start off with divination. Divination is the practice of seeking knowledge of the future or the unknown by supernatural means. The most famous verse brought up against divination in the Bible is Deuteronomy 18. And it says, "When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, or anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God." So this is always brought up without further investigation into the meanings behind these sayings. Jesus, the prophets, kings, and priests actually all performed all of these acts, but in a holy way. As with all things in our world, there is positive and negative polarity to the same acts, like I said before. So holy and unholy versions of the same things. You'll notice the phrase, quote, "the abominable practices of those nations," unquote, as in how these nations performed these practices, and I would argue not the practices themselves. So the first one, burning his son or his daughter as an offering, involved torture and bloodshed, and often was the killing of babies and children in fire. Here you can see an image of the god Molech. Oh, I didn't do my text here. There we go. All right. So when Jesus was killed, let me go back. So it was the killing of babies and children in fire. This was to garner power from gods and took away the free will of those who were killed. In contrast, when Jesus was killed, it was because of our disbelief in his teachings. He willingly gave himself up in order to stop this practice. His was the last sacrifice, as forced sacrifice was the way of doing things in the old world. So instead, Jesus' death was to show us that we had the power within us too, because in order to rise to life, he had to die first to show us we could also rise. Seeing this miracle, we would finally believe his words. He told us to follow his teachings, and he said we would do even greater things than he did. That's in John 14. We are told death had no hold over us, that it is an illusion, and to go forth living in the way he taught us to live, in order to gain that Christ consciousness he had for ourselves. He called us his brethren, after all. This is very different from the modern Christian belief of simply, quote, believing Jesus died for you and you're forgiven, unquote. No, we must follow his teachings. Believing in his death and ascension is believing in ourselves as well. It is believing in the holy power of God over death. So the next one is anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens. In the ancient days, this practice was often accompanied by torturing and killing a living thing, whether animal or human, and using the blood, the intestines, or the bones of the sacrifice in order to gain wisdom from spirits. No holiness or life came back from this. When using blood magic, practicing control over other beings, it will have a tendency to attract dark entities to that energy. They come in because it involves suffering and horror, which are of a very low frequency. This is the energy that negative polarity beings use for sustenance and food. And on the online communities, the modern vernacular for this has been called loosh. You can Google it. On the positive side, isn't divining and fortune telling just listening to God? Is this not what the prophets did? They told the future, they interpreted signs and had dreams, and received many messages and commands from God. However, to receive these, they practiced in a very different way. The next part of that verse was about sorcery. So a sorcerer was someone who used pharmakia, or a brew to manipulate someone mentally to believe anything or act in a certain way. This is spoken of in Revelation 18. The woman who makes the nations drunk with her wine. The Apostle John was taking the symbolism of the witch Circe in Greek mythology, who turned men into crazed beasts after they drank her wine. Pharmakia, in this context, is the negative use of substances to take away the free will or health of another person. This is also where our modern word pharmacy and the use of chemical drugs comes from, but that's a story for another time. And yes, there are many spirits out there who wish to take advantage of humans, but this is where having the Holy Spirit and discernment is key. Necromancers use blood and semen in their magic. In the ancient Jewish occult writings, they taught the process of how to create homunculi or cloned beings. This was an empty human vessel that could be filled with an outside spirit and could be commanded to perform whatever act the necromancer wished. Necromancers use evil spirits to raise people from the dead, like what we hear about in some African religions. These are where our zombie myths come from. This is not the original spirit that has returned to the body, but a negative spirit that is controlled by the necromancer. Again, showing the intention is dark and without free will. These zombies were used to cause terror or take control over people in the villages. The positive act was Jesus bringing people back to life, like in the story of Lazarus, or where he himself came back to life, to continue the good works they were performing, and to show that death is not the end, but an illusion. In this case, the original spirit returns and retains their free will. In Matthew 17, it says, "And after 6 days Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, both quote-unquote dead, talking with him." So you can see here Jesus was talking to dead people. Humans also speak to angels all over the Bible, and angels are spirits or messengers from God. In 1 Samuel 27 through 31, there's a story of the witch of Endor. She was consulted by Saul to bring up the spirit of the prophet Samuel, and she was not put to death after this. She saw the spirits of the Elohim, which means God, coming in, and then a spirit of a man, who was Samuel, wrapped in a robe, and he spoke. The spirit gave a prophecy of defeat for Saul's army, which did come true. The woman is kind to Saul after his tremendous fear after hearing the bad news, and she takes care of him. Before this all happened, though, Saul tried to get answers from God through dreams, prophets, or the Urim and Thummim stones, which we'll talk about later. And he didn't receive any answers, so he then went and talked to the witch. But then, in contrast, in 1 Chronicles it said Saul died because he didn't seek answers from the Lord and talked to a medium instead, and this is why he died. So this is a contradiction, because obviously he did try everything to hear from the Lord and obviously didn't hear anything back. So, just going to leave that there. That's something to maybe look into deeper if you'd like to. The next point is that Jesus went and spoke to spirits in Sheol, which was the Hebrew word for the grave. These were people that were no longer alive on the earth. They were spirits. Jesus also raised men from the dead, and he himself was risen from the dead. The dead are not really dead, but spirits, or beings that live in a different frequency than us, and are all around us at all times. Being a spirit does not automatically equate to being a demon or evil spirit. They're just like humans. Spirits can be of the light or the dark. There are many loving and holy spirits around us at all times. Many are angels, guides, and teachers. The next form of divination is called watermancy. It's a form of divination using a cup or bowl filled with water. In the story of Joseph, who was second in command to the Pharaoh at the time, he used his brother's cup to ask answers of the Lord in the water. I'm sorry, I think I messed that up. He used his own cup to ask answers of the Lord in the water. So in Genesis 44, it says that Joseph tests his brothers, who haven't seen him in years, right? So they don't recognize him anymore because he probably looks like an Egyptian at this point. So he tests his brothers by returning their money and each sack of grain that they had purchased. In Benjamin's sack, who was the youngest son, he places his special silver cup. After the brothers leave for home, Joseph then sends his steward after them to confront them over their theft of the cup. The steward was to say to them, "Why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this." In verse 15, Joseph accuses his brothers in person, saying, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Joseph's claim to have knowledge of divination seems to conflict with the Bible's condemnation of divination as evil. The most likely scenario is that Joseph did own a silver divination cup, as did all Egyptian nobility at the time, and used it to get answers from God. The next story is about divination and using any tool available when you're unsure of God's will. So in Judges 6, it said, "Then Gideon said to God, 'If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said.' And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. Then Gideon said to God, 'Let not your anger burn against me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and all the ground let there be dew.' And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground there was dew." The next type of divination was the Urim and Thummim. These were most likely stones used by the high priest for divination to hear from God. These were commanded to be worn on Aaron's breastplate, and Aaron was Moses' brother and the first high priest of the Israelites. These stones would light up, and when used to divine God's answer. These tools were used all over the scriptures throughout the generations. Urim means lights, and Thummim means perfection or truth. Many scholars now believe that Urim derives from the Hebrew Aram, which means curses, and thus that Urim and Thummim essentially means cursed or faultless, in reference to God's judgment of an accused person. In other words, Urim and Thummim were used to answer the question, innocent or guilty. Assyriologist William Mus Arnold connected the singular forms and tum with the Babylonian terms Urtu and Tamitu, meaning oracle and command. The next type of divination is kleromancy, or casting lots. This was a practice where items were thrown randomly to get yes or no messages from God. It's no different, really, than tarot, runes, or the I Ching that uses archetypes and symbols for answers. These work through synchronicity. And my favorite definition that I've ever heard about divination is this. Divination is using a tool that creates a completely random throw or pull. It is giving up our control and ego and giving dominion over to God to show us answers through this quote-unquote synchronicity. The practice of casting lots is mentioned 70 times in the Old Testament and 7 times in the New Testament. In spite of the many references to casting lots in the Old Testament, nothing is known about the actual lots themselves. They could have been sticks of various lengths, flat stones like coins, or some kind of dice, but their exact nature is unknown. The practice of casting lots occurred most often in connection with the division of the land under Joshua, a procedure that God instructed the Israelites on several times in the book of Numbers. God allowed the Israelites to cast lots in order to determine his will for a given situation. Also, various offices and functions in the temple were also determined by lot. The sailors on Jonah's ship also cast lots to determine who had brought God's wrath upon their ship, and that's what God pretty much told them, yeah, Jonah messed up, and that's why he got thrown overboard and got swallowed by a whale. The 11 apostles cast lots to determine who would replace Judas. And casting lots eventually became a game that people played and made wagers on. And this is seen in the Roman soldiers casting lots for Jesus' garments in Matthew 27. The next section is astrology. So astrology is using the stars to divine God's timing for events and the energies of what would happen during those times. In Genesis 1, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs." In Job 38, it says, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades," which is a star cluster? "Can you loosen Orion's belt," which is a constellation? "Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth," which is a zodiac constellation? The Mazzaroth in their season, or can you guide the bear, which is Ursa Major or the Big Dipper, with its children? According to 10th century biblical exegete Sadia Gaon, Mazzaroth literally means constellations, while others interpret the word as naming various other astronomical bodies. The similar word Mazalot in 2 Kings 23 may be related. In Yiddish, the term Mazalot came to be used in the sense of astrology in general, and surviving in the expression Mazel Tov, which meant good fortune. Beth Alpha was an ancient synagogue and a cave in Israel. It showed that Judaism accepted and promoted cosmology and its symbolism. And in some sense, the 12 signs could be seen as a sign of the 12 tribes of Israel or the 12 disciples of Jesus. Precession is a real astronomical effect that changes the dominant constellation that rises with the dawn sun at the vernal equinox, also called the spring equinox, and this happens roughly every 2,140 years. In layman's terms, one constellation or sign is the theme for that 2,000-year time frame. So these signs and archetypes are mirrored in the biblical story, starting with the sign of Gemini and moving backwards through the zodiac. The dates in the following slides are approximate and not exact. So we're going to start out at creation. This was the story of Adam and Eve. They are represented by the constellation of Gemini, also called the twins. And this is also known as the Lover's card in the tarot. It's one being who became two. Gemini is also the communicator of the zodiac, and it was during this time in the biblical story that God actually spoke and walked directly with man. Some metaphysicists theorize this as the creation of the atom, with the electron and proton within it. And the atom being split is what caused the Big Bang, and creation exploded into being. Again, it's just a theory, but I think it's a neat one. And the Bible also said that God spoke and the world was created through his voice, a sign of the mercurial Gemini archetype. From 4000 to 2000 BC, this was the time of Adam, Enoch, and Noah. And this was the sign of Taurus, which is the bull or the ox. This was a time of hard work after humanity had been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Taurus is a sign of earthly work and the stubborn and steadfast personality of an ox in the field. Much soil had to be toiled and dwellings built by human hands. Again, after the flood of Noah, the world had to be rebuilt a second time. Taurus is also a sign of beauty and the arts. It's interesting that the Bible says at this time the Watchers, or fallen angels, came to earth to teach mankind all manner of arts, makeup, the cutting of roots and plants, metalsmithing, among other things, which resulted in more sin. Taurus is also ruled by Venus, the planet of love, and it was also said that these Watchers were filled with lust for human women, and so left their place in heaven in order to procreate with them, and took them as wives because of their beauty. From 2000 BC to 0 AD was the time of Abraham and Moses, and this was the sign of Aries the ram. Aries is considered the first sign of the zodiac and begins the story of the archetypes or signs. God tested Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac, but then told him to stop and to instead kill a ram in his place. This was a symbol of the new age of Aries and the symbolism of the coming Christ, also known as the Lamb of God. This was also the beginning of the Mosaic Law, which begins the story of the tribes of Israel. This is when Moses came off the mountain after talking to God and saw the golden calf had been erected and worshipped. He was angered and ordered that the golden bull, or Taurus, be destroyed, again officially ending the old age and leading into the new one. God commanded Moses to tell the Israelites to smear lamb's blood across their doorframes while in captivity in Egypt, so that they would not be killed by the last of the 10 plagues. He also began the custom of blowing shofars, or ram's horns, for special holy occasions. You can even see in old artwork that Moses was often depicted with 2 light rays or ram's horns coming out of his head. In Exodus 34, it's often interpreted as meaning that Moses' face radiated light, but the Hebrew verb used, however, can literally mean to become horned. 0 AD to 2000 AD. This was the age of Jesus, or Pisces, the fish. Jesus is surrounded by instances of fish, telling us to be fishers of men, having fishermen as disciples, multiplying the bread and fish, and even water baptism became a thing at this time as well. The ichthus, which is 2 drawn lines that create a fish, was an early Christian symbol to secretly identify other believers. This symbol kept them from being found, persecuted, and killed. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac and is the sign of ego death, physical death, imprisonment, spirituality and meditation, and ripping the veil open between the physical and spiritual worlds. It is the sign of completing a cycle. Jesus did all these things. He had no ego, but lived through his heart. He was imprisoned and killed. He was a spiritual teacher. When he died, the Bible says the veil between man and God ripped open, and he completed the cycle of sacrifices, which had been the pattern so far in history. From now to the year 4000 AD, this is the age of the church, which is the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is a man holding a jar and pouring water out of that jar down to earth. So God pouring water, and water symbolizes renewal in the Bible. Pouring this water from heaven to earth is like a revelation or the Great Awakening. In Luke 22, Jesus tells his disciples to look for a man carrying a jug of water that would take them to the upper room. This room is where the Last Supper takes place. Although he carries a water jug, Aquarius is an air sign, which is indicative of the intellectual energy and new thought. Revelation 1 says Jesus' second coming will be in the clouds or in the air. We are seeing the Christ consciousness explosion in people right now as we speak. In Luke 21, it says, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars." God is literally telling us to study the stars and planets and know cosmic timing. Christians will often say that this is only for biblical events, but what does that mean? Are we not also children of God and have a mission and purpose here in the grand scheme? Should we not understand our timing and events as well? The amount of times I have been able to read the stars for someone and give them timing on things that will come for them is pretty fantastic. This helps them on their spiritual path based on the divine cosmological energy God has coded into them at their birth. Babylonians were master astrologers. The wise men, also known as magi or magicians, came from there. They were the students of Daniel, yes, Daniel of the lion's den, who dreamt dreams and learned the ways of prophecy and divination and taught the courts of the king. King Nebuchadnezzar assigned the prophet Daniel to the high office of chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. That's in Daniel 5:11. So in other words, Daniel was appointed chief of the Magi. These Magi were the men who watched the prophecies of the Old Testament about the cosmological timing to understand when the birth of Christ would take place and where to locate him based on the stars. It is widely speculated by astrologers that the Star of Bethlehem was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, the two largest planets in our sky appearing to sit right on top of one another to create a great light in the sky. The Revelation 12 sign happened on 3 BC, on one day only. This was Wednesday, September 11th, when Jesus was born. Makes you wonder why they created one of the biggest terrorist attacks on that day to kind of damper the energy, huh? And it happened a second time, again, on September 23rd, 2017, or what the book of Revelation tells us is the tribulation period. It says, "There was a great sign that appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter." So you can see in this picture right here is the constellation Virgo, and you see Jupiter is like in her stomach. So yeah, Revelation 12 was talking about the sign of Virgo, the virgin, who holds a sheaf of wheat. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, which literally translates to the house of bread. Jupiter is called the king planet and is known as the great benefic, or the luckiest and holiest planet. It is the planet of Christ and religion. The Draco, or dragon constellation, is also one of the largest in our sky. Only astrologers knew to watch for this as the signs for the Christ coming in two different forms, once in physical form and the next as a great awakening in the world and in his people with the Christ consciousness in their hearts. We can see this awakening happening now with all of the deceptions and evil in our world finally being exposed. The next section are cherubim, which are throne guardians. So in the book of Ezekiel, his visions are about the enthroned God, who controls the cycles of time, which is the zodiac and its movements. He describes a cherubim angel with 4 faces. These represent the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. The first was a bull, which is Taurus, a lion, which is Leo, an eagle, which is an ancient sign for Scorpio. The modern sign is a scorpion, and man, which is Aquarius. All right, our next section is meditation and body science. So meditation means to quiet the mind, focus on the inner self and on God, to receive understanding and messages, to heal oneself through wisdom received, and to quiet the ego or the Satan. In Luke 17, it says, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." In Psalm 48, it says, "Within your temple, O God, we meditate on your unfailing love." Psalm 49 says, "My mouth will speak words of wisdom. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding." It is often argued that meditation is a demonic practice, or that Kundalini awakenings can let evil spirits into you. I would argue otherwise. Meditation is spoken of many times in the Bible. Kundalini is the life force, or chi, electricity, or spirit that flows from the root energy center up to the head and up to God through our crown chakra. Jesus' life was also a parable and retelling of this. We have 33 vertebrae in our spine from the tailbone all the way up to the skull, and Jesus was 33 years old when he died, and the place he died was called Golgotha, which translates to the place of the skull. And you can see here in this picture, the skull was even shaped, or the hill was even shaped like that of a skull. Jesus also had 12 disciples, and there are 12 cranial nerves in the brain surrounding the pineal gland. The Christ, who is called the head, and his church was called the body. That's in Ephesians 1:22 through 23. In Matthew 6, Jesus said, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." So there are 2 really interesting theories on this scripture that I really resonate with. The first one, which is more about body science, it says that the sun represents the right eye. The moon represents the left eye. When the sun is alone in the sky, or single in the sky, the world is full of light. But when it marries the moon during an eclipse, it is no longer single, and the world, or the body, becomes dark. This is why Jesus said, if the eye is single, as in the right eye, the body is full of light. But if the eye is evil, meaning married to the left eye, the whole body will be full of darkness. In Zechariah 11, it said, "Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Now compare that to this verse about the sun being darkened in Matthew 24. It says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken." Celebrities cover their right eye with their hand because it represents blocking out the sun, or the light, because they serve Satan, who hates the light. The right eye and the right eye's field of vision are connected to the left brain hemisphere. The left brain is the side of logic and reason, which is light. The left eye and the left eye's field of vision are connected to the right brain hemisphere, which is the side of dreams and imagination, which is darkness, because dreams have to do with the night. These two sides don't mix. The light and the darkness don't mix. They need to be separated and single from one another. If they ever married, like an eclipse, the darkness from the right brain would infect the light of the left brain, turning them both dark, darkening a person's logic and reason, basically turning them into a lunatic, hence the word lunar, as in the moon. Such a person wouldn't be able to separate fantasy from reality, which would quickly turn into a nightmare. This is why Jesus said, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness." The second theory about this verse is more about meditation. The pineal gland, or third eye energy center, is what we open when we meditate. It is how we see and hear from God. It has optical nerves and is literally a single eye. It has the shape of a pine cone, and you can see images of pine cones all over Christian, Catholic, and other cultures' ancient art. So in the scriptures, when Jacob wrestled with God and then had a dream of a staircase to heaven, he named the place Peniel, which means the face of God. In Genesis 28, it says, "Jacob, taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, 'Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.' And he was afraid and said, 'How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.'" The gate of heaven was reached while he was in a dream state, or you could say a meditative state. This ladder could be a symbol again for the 33 vertebrae up the spine to the pineal gland, which connects us to the visions in heaven. Our next section is crystals and amulets. So crystals are beautiful creations of God and are mentioned many times in the Bible. In the New Age, crystals are said to have power. I don't necessarily believe this to be true, though. They are, however, a mineral structure that can be programmed with any kind of intention and therefore take on power. Just as with science, we now understand water is a liquid crystal and can be programmed with intentions, as shown by the experiments of Dr. Masaru Emoto. He spoke words to water and then froze it to see what shape it would then take on. These experiments have been replicated many times by people over the decades with water and rice. High vibrational words like love show a beautiful and healthy image, and low vibrational words like kill show disgusting structures and mold. Crystals will hold positive or negative energies, but we are the ones giving them power. In Ezekiel 13, it says that this is what the sovereign Lord says. "Woe to the women who sew magic charms on all their wrists and make veils of various lengths for their heads in order to ensnare people. Will you ensnare the lives of my people, but preserve your own? I am against your magic charms, with which you ensnare people like birds, and I will tear them from your arms. I will set free the people that you ensnare like birds. I will tear off the veils and save my people from your hands, and they will no longer pray or fall prey to your power. So in contrast, in Deuteronomy 6, it says, you shall love the Lord with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. These amulets from Moses were called tefillin. This is the name given to 2 black leather boxes with straps, which are put on by adult Jews for weekday morning prayers, and are worn on the forehead and upper arm. They are also called prayer boxes or phylacteries. Rabbi Michael Weiser in the 19th century made the observation that the amulets and veils were the mirror to the tefillin, which were to represent the law of Moses on the heart and mind, that is, on the hand and head. Thus, the quote-unquote magical charms appear to be substitutes for the covenant of Moses. The Jews' sanctity of putting tefillin on the hand against the heart in order to subject the desire and intents of the heart towards the Lord is in direct contradiction to the women who placed amulets upon the head as over against the brain in order to enslave the power of thinking, and having in mind towards herself to bless herself. Thus, there were female witches with their analog amulets and veils who worshipped Balaam and self instead of God. You can see here that it's not the amulet itself, because Moses also had his people wearing amulets, but it was the intention in which these people used them for love and devotion, or for nefarious reasons such as blaspheming God and manipulating and controlling others. Crystals, or really any other item, have no inherent power, but they can be programmed by us with either negative or positive intentions, with curses or prayers. I know this to be true in working with dowsing rods to find Hartmann lines. Hartmann lines are concentrated areas of radiation that are caused by underground waterways. When we live or work above these Hartmann lines, it causes health issues, insomnia, and anxiety in humans, because it messes with our electromagnetic fields. I have studied with a teacher in the dissolving of these harmful energies by using crystals placed in specific locations that are programmed with prayers and holy intentions. When placed correctly, they stop these energies from making me sick in my home. In the Old Testament, God commanded the priests to wear a breastplate of 12 precious stones. In Exodus 39, it says the first row was carnelian, chrysolite, and beryl. The second row was turquoise, lapis lazuli, and emerald. The third row was jacinth, agate, and amethyst. The fourth row was topaz, onyx, and jasper. They were mounted in gold filigree settings. We don't know if they were used in conjunction with the Urim and Thummim. They were placed behind the breastplate so that they weren't visible. But there has to be a reason that God was so adamant about using them. In the New Testament, God tells us what the New Jerusalem or the kingdom of heaven will look like. In Revelation 21, it says, it shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. The wall was made of jasper, and the city of pure gold, as pure as glass. The foundation of the city walls were decorated with every kind of precious stone. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth carnelian, the 7th chrysolite, the 8th beryl, the 9th topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, and the 11th jacinth, and the 12th was amethyst. Revelation 2 says that Jesus tells the church of Pergamum, I will give him a white stone and a new name written, which no man knows except him that receives it. This, I believe, is in reference to the Urim again. It signifies a decisive vote in one's favor, a judgment of innocence or new innocence, a reprieve from death, a covenant of safe passage, celebratory welcome, honor with free privileges, and a new and lasting identity known only by and intimately in God, and finally, an eternal hospitality with God. So you can see that God used stones and crystals a lot and seems to love the way they look and what they represent. Our last section is Reiki. So in John 14, it says, I tell you the truth. Anyone who has faith in me can do the same miracles I have done, and even greater things than these will you do. These healings included paralysis, lameness, fever, catalepsy, hemorrhage, skin disease, mental disorders, spirit possession, deafness, and blindness. Many of these healings were accomplished by the laying on of hands. This is indicated frequently in the New Testament. Luke 4 states, when the sun was setting, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. In Matthew 8, it says Jesus uses touch to heal Peter's mother-in-law of a fever. In Mark 1st and Luke 5, it says Jesus uses his hands to heal a man with leprosy. In Matthew 20, Jesus healed 2 blind men by touching their eyes. In Mark 8, Jesus uses his hands to heal another blind man. In Mark 7, he uses touch to heal a man who is deaf and can't speak. In Luke 7, he raises a dead man by touching his coffin. And in Luke 8, he uses touch to return a dead girl to life. So in Luke 9, Jesus gave his 12 disciples power to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. We don't know by what process Jesus gave this healing powers to his disciples, but the fact that he was able to pass it on to them indicates an important similarity with Reiki. Reiki is taught from a teacher to a student through private lessons. At the end, the power then passes through the teacher's hand into the head or crown of the student with prayer and intention, which are called attunements. In Matthew 13, it says, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. This secrecy is also spoken of in Mark 4. So this proves certain teachings and healing power were only given to or understood by Jesus' close disciples. Another aspect of Jesus' healing practice that is similar to Reiki relates to faith. While faith was required for many of the healings he performed, it appears that the healings Jesus did with his hands did not require faith. In Mark 6, it says, he could not do any miracles there, except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them, and he was amazed at their lack of faith. So in spite of the fact that they did not believe, Jesus was still able to use laying on of hands to heal. This is one of the important aspects of Reiki. It doesn't require faith on the part of those receiving a treatment in order for the Reiki to work. It is not known whether Jesus was born with the ability to heal through touch, or if this was something he acquired. His activities between age 12 and 30 are not mentioned in the Bible. It has been suggested by several researchers that during this time, Jesus traveled to the East and was schooled in many of the mystical teachings of India, Tibet, and China. If this is so, it is possible that Jesus was initiated into a healing technique during this time. There is a very beautiful book called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ that goes more in depth into these lost years. On the other hand, it is also possible that Jesus was taught directly by God or the Holy Spirit, or simply had these abilities from birth. This is how Dr. Yusui, the Japanese teacher of modern Reiki, said he received the gift. He went up on a mountain, just like Jesus and many prophets did in the Bible. He meditated or prayed and felt the wisdom and power enter him. And in this photo, it's a quote from Yusui. It says, Reiki is love, love is wholeness, wholeness is balance, balance is well-being, and well-being is freedom from disease. There is some good information indicating that the healing methods of Jesus were preserved by the Church of the East and passed on by its missionaries who traveled along the Silk Road and other trade routes to India, Tibet, and China. It is possible that this information on healing could have been incorporated into the religious teachings of the East, and therefore Jesus could have been the original source of the Reiki teachings that were used by Dr. Yusui. We just don't know where it started for sure, but we can definitively see the similarities. Reiki uses what is called holy fire, energy, or chi. In my opinion, it is using the healing and purifying fire of the Holy Spirit. When I turn on my own Reiki energy, I see a pillar of white light come down from heaven into my body, and then I see purple pillars of fire coming up out of my hands. Purple fire is known as the violet flame and is a spiritual technology that was given by Saint Germain. It is a powerful healing and purifying fire, but there are many types of spiritual technology or gifts that are given by God, and they come in many different forms. Just as the angels have flaming swords, we too can have flaming hands that heal. For more info on the purifying fire of God, please see my last sermon in this biblical series called Disproving Hell and Eternal Torment Using the Bible, and that's located on the Fifth Element Free Church YouTube channel. The early followers of Jesus' teachings were made up of several groups. One such group was the Gnostics. They practiced laying on of hands and professed to have a secret knowledge that had been passed on to them by Jesus and his disciples. The Gnostics were made up of many smaller groups, some of which were known as the Docetists, the Marcionites, and the Carpocratians. They were united by their core beliefs, which included a personal experience of Jesus, or the kingdom of heaven within, their freedom and lack of rules, guidelines or creeds, and their reliance on inspiration and inner guidance. Their existence is attested to by the Gnostic Gospels, which were part of the Nag Hammadi Library, which was discovered in Egypt in 1959. The fact that Jesus had additional teachings not recorded in the Bible is attested to in a letter written in the 2nd century AD by the early church father Clement of Alexandria. In Clement's letter, he spoke of a secret gospel of Mark, which was based on the normal canonical one, but with additions for special followers of Jesus, referred to those as those who were being perfected and those who are being initiated into the great mysteries. So that's just proving that a lot of the things taught in the modern church were not for people who were looking deeper into the greater mysteries. When Christianity became organized by Rome after the 2nd century, its teachings were centered around faith and the original teachings of the church, and the official teachings of the church, rather than healing or good works and inner guidance as practiced by the Gnostics and Jesus. At this time, those promoting the organization of the church began subduing and banishing those Gnostics who would not conform to the authority of the newly developed church. In addition, they tried to destroy the Gnostic Gospels, and this is why copies were buried in Egypt to keep safe. With the elimination of the Gnostics and the establishment of the official Christian church, The practice of laying on of hands by normal Christians was strongly discouraged. And so we lost a large part of Jesus' ministry, in which he told us to go out and do to the nations, which was healing. So final thoughts. And I'll just say with that, I hope this gives you a short, I kind of laughed at that because this was not so short, a short overview to get you started on your journey from fear and dogma, and hopefully into a deeper understanding of how God operates through and with us. We can branch out from what the modern church has told us and garner a deeper relationship with the Creator through his own practices that have been demonized for years. So thank you for listening, and God bless you. I hope you have a good day. Thanks.